The rain wasn't just falling. It was punishing, a cold, relentless deluge that blurred the world. Elias Thorne stood on the very edge of the rain-slicked bridge, his fingers white as they gripped the rusted metal railing. Every breath felt like a battle against the heavy, humid air. In his coat pocket, the damp final eviction notices and medical bills had become his entire identity. He was drowning long before his feet would ever touch the water. The debt was a physical weight, a suffocating presence that lived in the hollow of his chest and the ache of his joints. It had stripped him of his dignity, his sleep, and any hope for a future that didn't involve hiding from the shadows of collectors. Every ticking second was a reminder of the money he lacked and the mother whose life depended on medicine. To the world, Elias was already a ghost, a statistical casualty. A pair of piercing LED headlights cut through the fog, silent and predatory. A black sedan, polished to a mirror finish that seemed to repel the grime of the city, pulled to a stop just feet away. The chauffeur, his face obscured by a dark cap, emerged. Without speaking, he extended a gloved hand, offering a small silver card. Elias took it with trembling fingers. There was no name, no phone number, only a set of localized GPS coordinates and a phrase etched in elegant, sharp lettering. The cost of your past is your future. The weight of the card was surprising, heavy and cold like a coin for the ferryman. As the sedan glided back into the darkness, Elias felt a strange pull toward those coordinates, a realization that the man who stood on this bridge had nothing left to lose, because he had already lost himself to the numbers on a ledger. The journey led him to the industrial outskirts, to a facility hidden beneath a nondescript warehouse. Inside, the world was sterile and blindingly white, a labyrinth of glass and steel known as the archive. This was where he met the architect, a man whose presence was as sharp as a razor and whose eyes held the cold brilliance of a diamond. The architect didn't offer a handshake, he offered a revelation. He spoke of the Tabula Rasa program, a secret initiative designed for the desperate. The deal was absolute. Every cent of Elias's debt would be erased instantly. His mother would be moved to a private sanctuary where she would receive world-class medical care for the rest of her life, funded by an anonymous trust. In exchange, Elias would receive $1 billion inheritance and a life of unimagined luxury. But the price was not paid in currency. The cost was his very existence. To claim the fortune, Elias had to undergo total reconstructive surgery, vocal cord alteration, and months of grueling psychological conditioning. He was to become Arthur Sterling, a disgraced billionaire and the butcher of Wall Street, who had supposedly died in a private accident. The real Sterling had been a monster of industry, a man whose name was synonymous with greed and cruelty. Elias looked at a photograph of the man he was to become, a face with high, arrogant cheekbones and eyes that looked like they had never known a moment of regret. He thought of his mother's struggling lungs and the way the debt collectors had pounded on his door at 3 a.m. He realized Elias Thorne was already dead to the world. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The architect handed him a fountain pen filled with ink that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Elias signed the contract with a steady hand, a final act of suicide disguised as a rebirth. As the medical team moved him onto a cold titanium table, a heavy sedative began to burn its way through his veins. His vision flickered, the bright lights spinning into a vortex. The last thing Elias heard was the architect's voice, a chilling whisper. "Say goodbye to your soul, Elias. You won't be needing it where you're going." The light was no longer the sterile white of a laboratory. It was the soft, filtered amber of a high-end estate. When Elias first opened his eyes, the silence of the room was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock. He pushed himself up from the silk sheets, his movements feeling strangely coordinated, his limbs possessing a strength he hadn't earned. He walked slowly toward the mirror. The man looking back was a stranger. Gone were the hollow cheeks of hunger and the desperate eyes of a debtor. Instead, a face of sharp, sculpted marble stared back. Arthur Sterling had cold, calculating eyes and a predatory smile. It was a face built for war, a face that had never known the indignity of an eviction notice. The months that followed were a descent into a different kind of hell. The architect was always there, overseeing the process of erasing what remained of Elias Thorne. They didn't just give him a new face, they gave him a new soul. His humanity was being methodically dismantled by machines and whispers. For hours every day, Elias was strapped into a chair, forced to watch flickering loops of Arthur's past, his business deals, and his clinical betrayals. He was taught to speak with a low, gravelly authority and to walk with the entitlement of a king. Every time a memory of his mother's face or the smell of his old apartment tried to surface, the conditioning pushed it back down, replacing it with the cold, hard logic of the butcher of Wall Street. He began to forget his own laughter, replaced by the cynical bark of a man who viewed people as assets or liabilities. His first test came at a high-stakes board meeting at the summit of a glass tower. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and the quiet terror of executives. Elias felt a wave of nausea looking at documents designed to liquidate a subsidiary, a move that would ruin thousands of lives. But as the eyes of the board turned toward him, the conditioning took over. He spoke with Arthur's voice, cold and unwavering, dismissing the human cost with a flick of his wrist. He was ruthless and efficient. When the meeting ended, the board members looked at him with awe and fear. Elias felt a sickening void where his conscience used to be, a hollow space that only the pursuit of power could fill. Despite the wealth, the ghost of Elias Thorne still haunted him. He bypassed his security and drove to his old neighborhood. He found the small house where his mother now lived. Peering through the window, he saw her sitting in a comfortable chair, looking healthier than she had in years. The color had returned to her cheeks, and her breathing was steady. A surge of love and relief washed over him. He stepped out of the car, driven by a desperate need to hear her voice. But when he approached her, the reality of his sacrifice became a blade. She looked up at him with narrow eyes. She didn't see her son. She saw a monster. She spat at his feet, her voice trembling with fury as she cursed the name Arthur Sterling. She retreated inside, slamming the door. He was a stranger to the only person he loved. Broken and hollow, he returned to the manor. Late that night, Elias discovered a hidden safe containing Arthur's private journals. As he turned the pages, the truth emerged. Arthur hadn't died. He had been retired by the archive because he had become too soft for their global designs. The program was a factory for monsters, a way to recycle identities to keep the world under shadow control. The realization was a cold stone in his gut. He reached the final entry, written in a shaky hand. The program doesn't just change your face. It waits patiently for you to commit the same sins I did. The weight of the fountain pen felt like a mountain in his hand as the architect stood over him. The document on the mahogany desk was a death sentence for a community, a maneuver to displace thousands of families for a luxury complex. It was a cruel irony. Elias was being asked to destroy the very neighborhoods that once nurtured him. The weight was unbearable, yet he had no other choice. The architect's voice was a cold velvet as he explained that Arthur Sterling's signature would ensure his mother's safety forever. At that moment, Elias realized the ultimate truth of the deal. His debt hadn't been paid, it had been transferred to his soul. To keep his mother alive, he had to become the predator he had spent his life fleeing from. Determined to break the cycle, Elias began a desperate game of digital chess. Using Arthur's untraceable offshore accounts, he started funneling encrypted fragments of the archive's secrets toward international press outlets. He worked in the dead of night, seeking to expose the tabula rasa program. The silence of the estate was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The betrayal stung, a reminder that he was never truly in control. The archive was a ghost in the machine. Before he could send the final payload, the screens flickered to life, showing a feed of his mother's sanctuary. She was surrounded by guards with silent weapons. The architect's face appeared on the monitor, revealing the final hook. Her life was the living collateral for his performance. The confrontation at the archive's headquarters was a silent war of wills. Elias stood in the sterile hall, the weight of his mother's life and the lives of thousands pressing down on him. He realized he could not win as Elias Thorne or as Arthur Sterling. His identity was fracturing into 1,000 jagged pieces. He watched the monitor show his mother's sleeping face once more. He surrendered fully to the conditioning, diving into the cold void of the Sterling persona. He used the ruthlessness he had been taught to bypass security protocols, triggering a system failure in the facility's core. He felt his memories of home dissolving into static as the identity took hold. To ensure the leak was irreversible, he used his own mind as a bridge for the corruption. In those agonizing seconds, the last spark of Elias Thorne was extinguished to let the butcher finish the job. The aftermath was a global scandal. The archive was dismantled as the truth of the identity recycling program dominated headlines. The news cycles moved on, but his face remained a symbol of corporate evil. His mother was safe, relocated to a charity home, though she would never know her benefactor was her son. She was finally safe from the shadows of his past. The victory was hollow. Because the transformation was so complete, the world saw only Arthur Sterling, the criminal mastermind who had finally pushed too far. Elias was arrested and processed under a dead man's name. The evidence he leaked to destroy the archive also served as a confession for Sterling's lifelong list of crimes. He was condemned by the very truth he had unleashed, a victim of his own righteous betrayal. He sits in a concrete cell, a space no larger than the apartment he once couldn't afford. He is the wealthiest man on the planet, with billions in assets frozen. Yet he has nothing. He is a ghost, haunting his own expensive cage. He stares at his reflection in a polished metal plate. The face looks back, sharp and regal even in a prison jumpsuit. He is free of debt, free of the collectors, and free of hunger. But he is a prisoner in a dead man's skin. He leans close to the metal, whispering his own name. Elias. The sound is foreign, a ghost of a syllable that sparks no memory. He looks at his hands and realizes that while he saved his mother, he lost everything.